I was born in London, and I'm very happy to be a lion. I think I've just been lucky in my life. I've always always wanted to be. I always wanted to be at the top of whatever I was doing. But some of the things I wanted to be, I was not able to get there. So then I switched roads. I switched directions. Well, my mother was a housewife. She never worked. My father was, I suppose, what you would call these days an entrepreneur. He did his own thing and did what to make money. He had no actual job. He had no actual profession, but he made money. I think he made money. He was making ice cream. And then I think he had an ice cream factory which made wafers and cones. But I remember when I was quite young, he was able to put the money down for a brand new house in Tottenham, facing the park where ran the River Lee. And it was a very nice house. It was a corner house, a terrace house, and very modern for those days. But just as the youngsters have problems today with mortgages, eventually after a few years he couldn't keep up with the mortgage and we had to move. And we moved many, many times, I remember. Unfortunately, the last time we had to move back into Islington, and I was left. I had to leave. I had to leave my school where I was, which was a very nice school, I must say. But then I had to go into an Islington, North London school, which was very, and I think the boys, the other students, didn't really get on very well with me. I left school when I was 14 and I became an errand boy in a cheese factory. And it was at that particular time that I became interested in a little bit in politics, which led to the left, which led to an argument with my father. It was because my ideas were a little leftish, and which he didn't agree with. He got very angry with me anyway, and he rushed upstairs and found his medals and threw them on the table and said, "And that's what I went through 4 years of hell for, to hear you say that." And I felt so ashamed of myself that the very next day I went out and joined. I don't remember having any particular fear. My mind doesn't really deal very much with the future. It's always at the present. Only when I'm forced to think about something for the future do I seriously consider it. But normally I live very much day by day, minute by minute. I suppose I was fortunate because after a short time I was made a Lance Corporal, and then from there I remember I was selected for an officer training course, and during that time there was the opportunity to transfer to the Indian Army, and this caught my attention and my imagination, and I volunteered, and then I set sail. I think I was 21, and I was sailing on the. I remember, yes, I was my 21st birthday was spent on the Indian Ocean. Well, you know, I arrived in Burma at the end of 1943, and we had to get down to Rangoon. And finally, eventually, we arrived to be outside Rangoon. It was not a very pleasant experience. It was one of the most unpleasant experiences of the war for me. But it was a terrifying moment because it didn't matter what simple act you might do or something that you might find interesting to look at. By touching it, it could be booby trapped there. It was a terrifying moment because there were from one second to another you could exist and then not be there anymore. Many of my friends disappeared very quickly, unfortunately. But from there we went into Singapore, and Singapore in those days was a city, was not a state. That was also not a very happy experience because we were the first European officers who had got into the city, and we witnessed many of the camps that the prisoners had been kept in and the conditions under which they were kept. Many years. I couldn't be in the same room as a Japanese person, but also that with time eased and became easier because reading books and learning a little more about the culture of the East and the Japanese, you realize that, for instance, the story of Okinawa with the Japanese and the Americans, the Japanese couldn't understand the concept of being a prisoner of war. For them, you had to fight until you died, and you never ever became a prisoner. A prisoner of war was an animal, was something in their culture was something that really should not exist. So at the time it was happening, of course, I had no concept of that. It was only afterwards, many years later, when I began to read more about the culture, their culture, that I began to understand the actual feelings that they had. Yes. And understand why the prisoners were treated so badly. Eventually, in Singapore, I became the port officer of Singapore, and I was responsible for searching for meeting every ship that came into the harbour and the control of rice into Southeast Asia Command. I came back to a very grey city, to a very miserable city, really, London. My parents were living then in North London. They had a house in Edmonton. And for me, I wanted some of the brighter lights. In my mind, the theatre was what I wanted, and I applied for a government grant and just sort of waited and waited. Nothing really happened. And then I answered an advertisement in the Times in which they were looking for a representative to represent security and to sell security products abroad in the Arab countries. And I applied, and I was accepted. But at the same day, I received a note from the government saying that I had been granted my student grant for RADA, for the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. The girlfriend at that time was Barbara Jefford, and she has become not a Judi Dench or Maggie Smith, but she has become a great Shakespearean actress and has become famous. Alan Bates was also there, where we were all young hopefuls. I remember some of the names, but we didn't all make the top. I went, after that, I went into a repertory company, and I stayed in a repertory company for almost a year. it was wonderful experience, but very hard work because you were doing a play 1 week, you were rehearsing for the second week, and you were reading for the third week. So it was hard work, really was. In 1948, there was a big ball, a fancy dress ball, of the Vic Wells fancy dress, which doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but it was run by Hermione Gingold, and she was our star at that time. During that ball, I met this man, this boy. He was a couple of years older than I, really, which was unusual because I didn't like people older than myself. And he was dressed as a matelot, a French matelot, and I was very avant-garde for the time. I went as Mr. Jockey Wifefront, and I wore just a pair of Wifefront underpants. Slowly we got together, and we spent, I suppose we were 7 or 8 years together, and my father died in 1959. He was a young man too. He died at 61.
Okay.
Unfortunately, with cancer. It was terrible. And I really regret. Now, it's strange, as you grow older, you see things from a different point of view. And I regret I didn't have a closer relationship with him. Well, he would never, I think my mother knew my inclinations because I remember one time I was 16 or 17, before I joined the army, I had met a youngster, and he wrote me a letter, but he addressed it to John Allen, which was my father's name. And she opened the letter, thinking it was from my father, and it was a little love letter from this boy, in which he finished, love. John was his name. And she said, with a strange voice, she says, and I said, well, he's just like that, he does that. And she said, and are you like that? And I was so embarrassed. I said, I don't know what you mean, and walked off. That also is a big regret in my life, that I didn't reply and say, yes, I am. Because she knew, she obviously knew, but I don't think my father ever knew. Okay. All my family have known forever, they all know. I decided that I would make a trip to the States, and I knew a few people. I knew a man called Arthur Lubin, and Arthur Lubin was an American director, quite well known in those days. And he invited me to go to the States, to California, and I thought, well, it's an opportunity. Maybe I find somebody in Hollywood that will recognize the qualities that they need. But unfortunately, what I wanted didn't happen, and then I returned to England again, to London. Returning to London, it was, I couldn't settle down. I couldn't find a job. I couldn't, I was not happy with London. I was not happy with myself. I was not happy with anything. But eventually, I visited, now we're way up into the 60s, no, into early 60s, I went to Rome. And in Rome, I found what I was looking for. For me, it seemed to such a warm, wonderful city that I decided that I wanted to stay there. And I had met already in London Claudio, and we decided to pool our resources and start a gallery. Well, neither of us had very much money, and most of the Italian galleries at that time were involved with the famous Italian artists, Morandi, Guttuso, Cagli, all of those. So we felt we couldn't compete with the established galleries that were there. We had to find something different. So we went to the European artists outside of Italy, all young artists who were known in their own country but not known in Italy. And that is how we started with the gallery. And it became quite well known in Italy. And then we decided that how can we enlarge the gallery, the sphere of the gallery. And during a conversation, I discovered that most of the major galleries of the world had one artist which they were linked to. And we were very fortunate because the maestro Giorgio de Chirico, who had had a contract for 20 years with a small gallery in Rome, and was considered by many people to be already dead and forgotten. He had not had an international show for many, many years. And at that particular moment, his wife had had an argument with the gallery owner because she wanted a piece of jewelry and he wouldn't supply it. So they had broken their contract with them. But what we did do was to have a contract with him and his wife to produce the catalogue raisonné of de Chirico. And this was the basis of the fame of La Medusa, which was our gallery at that time. And Cocteau himself in the 1930s wrote that there were two geniuses in the world of our century, and that was Picasso and de Chirico. So slowly, with our help, I can say without any false pretensions, he was reactivated and began to be re-evaluated. What created more an international theme for the gallery was the collection of the making of the archives of Giorgio de Chirico. Yeah. And that became the basis of the foundation of Giorgio de Chirico, yes, which they still acknowledge. But before that, London Times, I remember in the 50s, I knew Bacon, and we used to use the same pub together with the Red Lion in Soho, and also with his friend Lucian Freud. But obviously my taste had not developed at that particular time. I didn't understand his paintings. I couldn't appreciate them, and it was only much later in the 80s. I remember visiting Paris and seeing a retrospective of Bacon, and said, "Oh my God, how stupid I was!" If you run a gallery, you can't run a gallery and be a collector. When you run a gallery, you have to buy and sell, and your collection really consists of those paintings you don't sell. But well, in those days you had to be very careful. It wasn't accepted. In fact, with Claudio and myself, we lived together as a couple, and in Rome that was the first couple of gay men living together. Another thing, we scandalized a little Rome because both of us would appear in black leather. I stayed in Rome, and Claudio traveled a great deal backwards and forwards to New York, and that in a way began a split between us. And after 6 or 7 years, he was more in New York than in Rome. and also he became involved with another person, and which left me often alone. And in 1977, I met another person, and that other person is still with me. So now, he was then 28, 29, now he's 65, so and he's in Rome now.
Right. Oh, that's lovely. And is it Giuseppe?
That's Giuseppe.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I didn't know. Okay.
Rio came into this because Claudio and I wanted a winter holiday home, and I remember we were invited to a cocktail party one time in Copacabana in Avenida Atlantica, in a very beautiful 1950s edifice on the 9th floor, and it had a wonderful view of the Gulf of Copacabana. And I said, "Oh, what a marvelous place! I really love this place." And our hostess, she said, "Well, if you really like it, there's a place for sale down below." So the next day we went down to have a look at it, and we bought it the same day. In December, January, February, March, I'm in Rio, and then March, April, May, June, I'm in Rome, and then July, August, usually we go somewhere, we do something, then back to Rome for October, November, and then back to Rio in December. The year goes very quickly. Not enough time. And in between times, of course, there was always 3 or 4 weeks here in London in May. But no, I'm very fortunate in as far as when I was younger, I was very much in the gymnasium and was very much into bodybuilding and masculinity and tattoos. Well, this one here, the eagle, it came from Blackfriars Road. Was it Blackfriars Road? Near Waterloo. There was a very famous tattooist in that time, it was 1950. And it was a very masculine thing in those days. It was not, as it is today, a fashion. In fact, I regret when I see some of the tattoos of today with the Japanese or the Chinese graffiti on the arms. That, oh, that would be fantastic. I would have done that. This was, and I had more muscle. I was in Rio, and I passed this tattoo shop and I said, well, let's do the other arm. Well, mothers is extraordinary, you know. I'm always amazed at that particular time. I remember one time, it must have been in 1949. I was in Brighton one Sunday visiting friends, and we went down on the promenade and visited 1 or 2 pubs. And one pub I went into, there was a family seated, a group of families seated against the wall. There was mother, father, son, daughter, and others. And the boy was very good looking, very handsome, masculine type of boy that I liked very much. And I kept looking at him. And then finally I heard the mother say, "Hey, Bert, I think he fancies you." And I went bright red, and I was so embarrassed, I fled. My mother was a Catholic, my father was a Protestant, and they married outside the Catholic Church, and my mother gave up the Catholicism when the local priest came round and told her she was living in sin, and from that she never went back to the church. I was brought up with no religion at all, really. I went to Sunday school and I suppose Protestantism. But when I was 16 or 17, I began to have a group of Catholic friends, and I began to be involved in Catholicism, and eventually, after a number of years, became a Catholic, which I practiced for a long time. But now, sad to say, I'm a relapsed Catholic. I cannot, I believe, what I believe in is, I can't tell you. I believe in energy, I believe in creation, in a creator, but I cannot believe in the church, and I cannot believe in the rituals and the robes and the ceremonies. It makes me think of Egyptian priests praising the sun. Giuseppe believes in reincarnation. I can't believe it. No, afterlife for me is that there is always matter. There is always something. We go back to energy, we go back to dust, and that's it. I cannot believe that we exist. Well, who is the scientist, the English scientist, Stephen Hawkins? Stephen Hawkins. He believes that there are parallel worlds, and that we slip maybe from one world to another. That is possible because people do have these strange experiences of, I've been here before. But no, when we are electricity. When you switch off, you switch off. And I have very few regrets about the past, about anything that I have done. I don't think very much of the future. I do think sometimes, now that I'm of this age, I do think that I will be, if I am lucky, I will just go out from one day to the next. If I'm unlucky and I have to continue from day to day on a yearly basis of being unwell, I think that would be horrific.
Yes.
I can't imagine. Everyone complains about the youngsters of today. The youngsters of today are no different from the youngsters of yesterday. And I think what we all forget or not remember is what happened in the 1914-1918 war. For us, the whole of Great Britain, the world changed completely. We had the death of more than 200,000. 2 generations died. So many things happened. Women began to be emancipated. Women were going into factories, were working. Everything that happened in that particular time now reflects today. Today is what happened with the suffering of those 4 years. So I think we have to remember a great deal of what happened in the past, and the misery that ordinary people went through to give us what we have today. I've been very lucky in my life. I've been very lucky with people. I've had some wonderful friends. I've had some wonderful experiences. No, I wouldn't. I would never want to go back to be young again. Never, ever. To suffer the anger, the anxiety, the anguish of what is going to happen, what will I be, what will I do, how will I finish up. No, they were terrible. I suffered really enormously from depression in those days. And no, I wouldn't want to go back to that. I'm very happy as I am, and I hope to go forward.